Kaya, and good afternoon. My name is Harlene Hain, and I have the great privilege of being the Vice Chancellor at Curtin University. It is with very deep respect that I acknowledge that we are all gathering today on the traditional lands of the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation. And at Curtin, we have made a very strong commitment to teaching and learning in partnership with our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander colleagues. Now, as the State of the State's co-sponsor, it's an honor for me to welcome all of you who are joining us via the live stream to hear the Premier, the Honourable Mark McGowan, present his annual keynote address, State of the State. As Western Australia moves gingerly towards reopening, with a date still to be announced, it is poised to play a central role in Australia's post-pandemic economic recovery. With the best performing economy in the country and an unrivaled reputation for keeping the community safe throughout the pandemic, WA has the potential to leverage its best in-show performance to rebound faster and stronger than many. From a university perspective, we will be extremely excited to welcome back our international students. As Minister for Education and Training, the Honourable Sue Ellery recently stated, this is the safest place pretty much anywhere in the world for students to come. It certainly is a compelling message. A choice between 5 great universities in the 6th most livable city in the world, one of the safest places during the pandemic, a strong economy and a workforce shortage, along with the opportunity to live and learn about the longest living culture in the world, and to visit some of the planet's most beautiful beaches. In a perfectly timed coincidence, Curtin's new exchange precinct at the northern end of our campus is opening at the start of next year. And for the very first time ever, Curtin is offering stunning new student accommodation right in the heart of our campus, with almost 1,000 new beds ready for both our international and domestic students. Now, we're lucky in WA to have 5 great universities that provide our students with a range of options about what and where to study. You may have heard some recent commentary in the media suggesting that the state's universities should be merged. This suggestion is based on the assumption that high rankings are a university's key driver, are necessary for attracting international students, and that larger universities get higher rankings. But the truth is, bigger isn't necessarily better. The top 20 ranked universities in the world, on average, have fewer than 25,000 students. The California Institute of Technology is the 6th highest ranking university in the world, and it has only 2,240 students. Furthermore, rankings are only one of a very narrow set of measures that indicate success. I'm very proud to say that Curtin has a higher employment rate for graduates than any of the G of 8 universities whose rankings are higher than ours. We also have more than 3 times as many international students as UWA, a fantastic university whose ranking is higher than ours. Now, as a newcomer to WA, I've been highly impressed by the incredibly collegial and collaborative relationships between all of this state's universities, which I believe is a far more productive way of leveraging our respective strengths and providing real choice for students who come to study here. Curtin's clear focus is to provide the highest quality student experience to ensure that our graduates are both career-ready and life-ready. Just like our inaugural cohort of graduates from the brand new Curtin Medical School, who are now ready to join the state's health workforce, and not a moment too soon, given the current shortages. These 53 graduates have been specifically trained to meet the needs of our currently underserviced areas of healthcare, with a strong emphasis on primary care, chronic disease, aging, Indigenous, and regional health. So when the border opens, we will be prioritizing the return of our international health science students so that they can complete their degrees and also join the local health workforce. So circling back to the beginning of my remarks, all 5 Western Australian universities are prepared for the next phase of the state government's response to the pandemic, and we are all looking forward to working with them to welcome our international students back to WA. These students are vital members of our university communities, and they are essential workers in a wide range of sectors, including hospitality, retail, agriculture, and tourism. Now, before I introduce the next speaker, I'd like to remind you to follow CEDA on Twitter at CEDA_news, and to join today's conversation using the hashtag StateOfWA. Please also participate in the discussion using the Pigeonhole app. You can enter directly via the live stream or log on via the URL, which may potentially be shown on the screen that I can't see. You can enter your own questions or view and vote on the questions of others via the app, and please take a moment at the end of today's proceedings to rate your experience on Pigeonhole. It is now my great pleasure to invite Michelle Tremaine, Managing Partner, PwC, to the lectern to make some introductory remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Hayne, for that kind introduction. I too would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land that we are meeting on today, the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation, and pay our respects to their elders past, present and future. So at PwC, we're long-standing members of CEDA, and we're very proud to be one of the major sponsors of today's State of the State. We're absolutely committed to helping to achieve the best outcome we can for our community and for our state, and we love bringing our people and our thinking together to help solve important problems and help our economy. Today, I have the honour of introducing today our keynote speaker, which is perhaps a strange role, considering he's someone that clearly needs no introduction to this audience. So in terms of today's formalities, we'll have the Premier's keynote address, and then we'll have an audience Q&A session. But I really think for all of us, just being in this room with almost 1,000 attendees, it's testament to the impressive handling of this pandemic by our government. I think one of the things that the government and the Premier is most proud of would be the thought leadership that they have placed in making sure that they're looking after the greater good, and also genuinely listening to the business community here in Western Australia. Through that, the Premier has been able to ensure that Western Australia continues to be the engine room of the country. And I'm sure it's no easy task and would undoubtedly take some steely resolve on very many occasions. So it's my privilege to welcome to the stage this afternoon Western Australian Premier, the Honourable Mark McGowan. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Michelle, and thank you all for coming along this afternoon. Can I acknowledge the traditional owners of the land upon which we meet today, the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation, their elders past and present, and thank Professor Len Collard for his welcome to country. Can I thank all my Cabinet and Parliamentary colleagues who are here today, to CEDA for hosting today's event, and anyone who might be watching on live stream. Thank you so much for joining us. It is a pleasure to be here once again for CEDA's State of the State event, the premier forum for discussing our economic future. CEDA to me has always been about the big picture, the long term, understanding the challenges we face and our plans to meet them head on. As we stand around 2 months away from our reconnecting to the world under our state transition plan. With the world still full of uncertainty, it's an important time to look to the future. But in order to understand where we are going, it's best to remember where we have been. When we were elected to government in March of 2017, we promised to deliver a long-term approach the state needed, not only to overcome the problems the state faced, but to seize opportunities on offer. Opportunities available through diversification and trade, engaging with our major trading partners, expanding into new industries, leveraging our existing strengths for job creation, not dependent just on commodity prices. It was something my ministers and I took to with gusto. We knew what a proper long-term approach would mean for Western Australians and West Australian jobs prior to the pandemic. We secured new projects, passed difficult reforms through a hostile upper house. We revived the TAFE sector, attracted large employers, drove down the unemployment rate, returned the budget to surplus, and became the only government in the country reducing debt. We got the economy out of recession. We had the ship of state powering forward with the wind in our sails. But unfortunately, as so often happens in government, business and life, circumstances get in the way. Just our luck, the world was struck by a once-in-a-century pandemic. COVID-19 hasn't just changed our lives and fortunes, it's changed the way we had to govern. We decided to limit travel from COVID-infected jurisdictions to keep WA COVID-free. We had to get deep in the detail to execute our unique WA strategy of an island within an island. It was not easy, but it was absolutely necessary. Even at the start of the year, it felt like all our hard work and sacrifice was potentially being undone. The Delta variant had just emerged. It was leaking out of New South Wales and into the rest of Australia. We didn't have any vaccines. We had a significant bushfire crisis. And to top it all off, we're in the midst of an election campaign. To keep COVID out of the community means every detail needed to be thought of. I've spent more time than I care to think about discussing hotel air conditioning and sports fixtures. It took hard choices. It placed a burden on some families and businesses. It took political capital as we had to deal with the predations from the likes of Clive Palmer, East Coast commentators and even the Prime Minister, just to ensure that WA could remain COVID-free with almost no domestic restrictions. But in the end, despite all the commentary and political attacks, our West Australian strategy has been vindicated. Vindicated on health, social and economic grounds, over and over again. In a pandemic that has officially claimed many millions of lives, Western Australia has recorded only one death from local community transmission, one unfortunate person. Sydney and Melbourne have spent hundreds of days under lockdown this year alone and recorded many deaths. Perth has experienced just 12 days in total in lockdown across 3 short periods since May of last year. By keeping COVID out of the state and restrictions out of our lives and businesses, Western Australia has driven the national economy. Our domestic economy recorded the strongest growth of all the states this year for a second year in a row. Over the 2 years impacted by the pandemic, Western Australia's economy grew by 3.7%, the strongest of the mainland states. We have provided the largest contribution to the national economic growth over that time of almost 40% of the national total. This was double the next best contribution from New South Wales, which has 3 times Western Australia's population. Western Australia is punching well above its weight, now accounting for 16% of the national economy, with only 10.4% of the total population. In fact, in today's September quarter data, WA's domestic economy grew 0.6%, while the national economy contracted, driven by a massive 6.5% contraction in the New South Wales economy. Our unemployment rate fell to 3.9% in October, our lowest rate in 10 years and the lowest of all the states by a long, long way. Every other state has an unemployment rate of over 5%, some nearly 6%. Western Australia also currently has the lowest underemployment rate, the highest participation rate of all the states by a long way, and the lowest youth unemployment rate of all the states. WA is the only state in surplus over the forward estimates, and the only state reducing debt. Debt is now $12 billion, lower than forecast under our predecessors. By keeping WA COVID-free, we not only saved lives, we kept the economy open, free of domestic restrictions, and firing on all cylinders. Our strategy has been very successful, but it cannot last forever. With our Safe Transition Plan, which we detailed earlier this month, we set a pathway forward for the next phase of pandemic management in WA. We will very shortly announce the fixed date that we will ease our controlled border regime, meaning that inevitably COVID will follow. We have used our time to prepare the health system and to vaccinate our population. We have invested hundreds of millions of dollars in our health system, billions in fact, not only to scale up to meet the current historic high demand, but to have the capacity to deal with COVID when it arrives. Our contact tracing teams have expanded their reserve capability to ensure we can stay on top of the virus when it enters Western Australia. We have a surge capacity of 800 contact tracers. And with regards to vaccination, since we announced the Safe Transition Plan on November 5, over 156,000 West Australians have received their first dose, and today we reached 87.1% first dose and 76.2% second dose of the over 12 population in Western Australia, meaning we are both confident that we can soon lock in that transition date sometime after next week's follow-up National Cabinet meeting. This will be an incredible achievement in a jurisdiction without community transmission of the virus and without any restrictions or lockdowns in place, acting as an incentive, something barely seen anywhere else in the world. By aligning the transition date to when we are likely to hit 90% double dose vaccination coverage, it means we will be in a unique position to have a highly vaccinated population with limited opportunity for the virus to gain footholds, to live with only light public health measures, to have one of the softest landings out of the pandemic anywhere in the world. But as we ease those border controls, allowing in double vaccinated arrivals, it lets us do something else, which is to look at the big picture and the long term once more, as we safely re-engage with the world, as the trading state of the nation that we are. I mentioned earlier, that's where we are most comfortable as a government. Difficult reform, essential diversification, long-term projects. And we have the record to prove it. Planning reform, strata reform, liquor reform, on-demand transport reform, energy reform, voluntary assisted dying legislation, family and domestic violence reform, infrastructure Western Australia, public sector reform, payroll tax cuts, our sensible wages policy, and local content reform with the WA Jobs Act, industry participation strategy, and the Buy Local 2020 policy. And we have not slowed down in our second term with Aboriginal heritage law reform, local government reform, electoral reform, reform of the Land Administration Act for hydrogen projects, and native forestry reform. with ongoing work on once-in-a-century projects like Metronet and the new port in the Kwinana industrial area. While none of this is easy, the public expects and deserves action and reform from government on the big issues. Our key priority, as we ease our state borders and the federal government eases their international borders, is to re-engage with our international trading partners, especially in areas that have been hit hard by the pandemic. Chiefly, tourism, airlines, and international education. All key priority areas for diversification prior to the pandemic. Areas where the state was achieving great success. In 2019, Western Australia recorded the highest ever number of international visitors and holidaymakers to WA. We are eager to see success there once again. In addition, we are looking to attract skilled labour in order to fill shortages in our workforce. But we cannot just ease our borders and expect tourists, airlines, students, and skilled workers to come flooding back. Which is why, for some time now, we have been working on a range of measures to ensure West Australian businesses can succeed as we safely transition our borders. So today, I'm proud to announce to you all our Reconnect Western Australia package, worth $185 million over the next 18 months, on top of an existing spend in these areas of $250 million. Our Reconnect WA package is designed as an immediate boost to ensure West Australian businesses and industries have the competitive edge when we warmly welcome back vaccinated travellers. The package is comprehensive, designed to support those four key areas: international education, airlines, tourism, and sourcing skilled labour. To give you the high-level view of the package, first and foremost, it's essential to get flights back to WA. We achieved our records prior to the pandemic for international visitation by securing more frequent and direct flights to and from key markets. We will invest $65 million in not only re-establishing pre-COVID flight routes to Perth, but securing new direct routes to Perth from markets such as Germany, India, China, and Vietnam. Regional WA will be included in this with $10 million to support more intra-state flights to ensure tourists returning to Western Australia via Perth can also experience our incredible regions. Second, there will be a marketing component, an additional $65 million to promote Western Australia as the safe and welcoming jurisdiction that we are, on top of the existing $80 million spend over the same period. There will be specific targeted campaigns to international students, to international and interstate tourists, as well as the agents that bundle the tourism packages together. In addition, we will grow our campaigns to attract workers to WA with specific approaches for crucial public sector workers like health staff and secondary teachers, skilled workers for industry, and backpackers for hospitality and agriculture. Thirdly, in order to compete with other states, we will be offering incentives to attract students, workers, and tourists to WA. While advertising and accessibility are crucial, in order to be competitive, we have to offer incentives as well. For example, with tourists, we'll be expanding the successful Stay and Play campaign, which offers discounts for those that stay in participating hotels, as well as vouchers for tours and experiences. We'll also resume our aggressive campaign to secure events for WA, to ensure that we have the attractions that bring in tourists. We're going to invest an immediate additional $9 million on top of the $77 million already committed out to 2023 to secure top-shelf, tourist-attracting events for Western Australia. We've seen great results prior to the pandemic with the European football teams and the UFC, Ultimate Fighting Competition, and we'll be aiming to do so again. My government will also seek to bring back the important business events market, which is so essential to filling our city hotel rooms, not to mention our bars and restaurants. There are many who will be shocked by the inevitable drop in business when our borders ease and Western Australians can travel abroad once more. This is contrary to what some people might be expecting will happen. So we must act now to attract the necessary visitors to fill the gap. There are some that claim that WA has waited too long to reconnect, to re-engage. There's a noisy minority who believe that it should have been done earlier, regardless of the loss of life or the harm it would impose on other businesses and industries or the potential lockdowns. But the virtue of our careful and cautious approach means Western Australia now has a new brand of safety, stability and strength. And we will use that brand to market ourselves to the world. If you're in business, don't you want to invest in the state that sensibly managed the pandemic and kept the economy operating? If you're a tourist, don't you want to come to the safest destination with a vaccination rate of over 90% and the lowest level of restrictions on venues and experiences? If you're the parent of a student, don't you want them to study in a jurisdiction that's safe and your child is less likely to catch a potentially deadly virus? Our success in managing COVID is a reputation to leverage for future success. And we will promote it to every market, to every industry, every country that we can. Now, to the elephant in the room. What does this plan mean in the context of the Omicron variant that is quickly spreading around the world? If I was outlining our reconnection plan last week, it would be a far more straightforward story. But as I mentioned at the start, circumstances always have a habit of getting in the way of plans. The reality is, over the coming days and weeks, the world will be watching closely as we wait for proper data on the transmissibility and severity of the Omicron variant. But we must also keep in mind, Omicron is not the first variant of concern that has emerged, and will not be the last. We intend to proceed with our safe transition plan. However, we will be listening closely to the advice at National Cabinet next week. With a vaccination rate over 90%, we will be one of the most vaccinated societies in the world. But as always, we will follow the health advice and do the right thing to keep Western Australia safe and strong. Many years ago, British Prime Minister Harold Macmillan was asked what was the greatest influence on his government. He replied, quote, "Events, my dear boy, events," end of quote. Events, crises, controversies, there are many things government can't control. But we can plan, prepare and build resiliency into our economy and community. That's why we have developed our Safe Transition Plan and Reconnect WA plan. That's why we are aiming for as high a vaccination rate as possible. That's why we are looking to the long term, the big picture, for our success. Western Australia is a trading state. WA's success comes from trade and engaging with the world. And Australia's prosperity comes from Western Australia's success. It's important we act now to capitalise on the nation's reconnection to the world and our state's reputation as a safe jurisdiction, to seize the opportunities to grow our existing industries, shape new ones, and diversify our state's economy. Because to diversify our economy is to make our economy and our state more resilient, to weather whatever the world throws at us. The last 2 years have proven the world can throw a lot of it at us. But at every twist and turn, Western Australia always rises to the challenge, and for that I thank you all. Thanks very much. I'll just grab my speech.
Yep.
The other side?
Yes, please. Thanks. Thank you, Premier, for that keynote address. And welcome everyone to our Q&A session. If you have questions for the Premier, there are 2 ways you can do that. First, you can do it via the Pigeonhole app, and details will be up on the screen shortly. You can also vote for the questions that you like, and they will go up to the top of the screen. The alternative, if you're brave enough, is to raise your hand. We've got some microphones that will come around to you. Please state your name and your organisation before asking your question. And Premier, welcome to the hot seat.
Thank you. I've been here before.
Although it shouldn't be burning too hot, as you mentioned. The state has outperformed nationally, and there's quite a lot of achievements that you've called out. As you said, we're the only mainland state to have grown, to have record growth in the last 2 years, and we've benefited obviously from the high iron ore prices, policy stimulus like the Home Builder program, which actually saw new dwelling investment surge 33% off the back of that to the year to September. And we've also, as you've pointed out, had minimal COVID disruptions to local businesses. Positively, our Westpac Card Tracker Index, which measures millions of credit card transactions every day, show that consumer spending in WA is still strong because it's running at 9 points above pre-COVID levels. Premier, this time last year, I did the Asian tiger mum on you, querying your less than 100% approval rating. But to your credit, you rose to the challenge. You've led WA Labor to a landslide election win, and you took on an extra job as State Treasurer, delivering a budget surplus of $5.6 billion. Quite impressive. So if you were Asian like me, you would leave your tiger mum with not very much to work on and ask for. In fact, you'd be rewarded. And Asian mums like to do this with food, typically your favourite dishes. So I've got 2 options for you, Premier.
Too many.
Would you prefer a Bunnings sausage sizzle or a kebab?
Okay. Before these things, you spent about 20 minutes prepping for questions. I didn't see this one coming. I'd probably go kebab, in that it's part of my brand.
Well, as a bonus, you should wash it down with
Well, you've got to stick with your brand. You're all in business, you stick with your strengths. I know on my epitaph, they'll write something about a kebab, because that's the most famous thing I've ever done in my life.
Well, those 2 things are what I see you eat on TV, so...
Well, you see me eating a kebab, you don't actually see me eating the Bunnings sausage sizzle. But I do hold them. When I was a kid, one of my best friends' dad ran a butcher shop, and I used to work there in a country town. And I used to work there a lot, and from that point forward, I don't eat many sausages. True story.
Thank you for sharing that personal anecdote.
Right. Well, I saw, as Bismarck said, 2 things you don't ever want to see: sausages being made or laws being created.
Well, I just think it's important to acknowledge and celebrate wins, because the outlook ahead is not without its challenges, as you've pointed out. Iron ore prices have halved from US 200 a tonne around mid-year to below 100. We've seen a fall in dwelling approvals since the end of the home builder scheme. We've mentioned WA's slightly slower vaccine rollout, which may hamper growth a little bit in the near term, particularly on tourism and migration flows. And unemployment being low is probably a double-edged sword as Labor continues to tighten. Although it's notable that it's still not at the super tight levels that we saw in the mining boom, which were well below 4%. So yes, a lot has been done, but I'm sure you feel there is still a lot to be done. So my first question is, I guess with the unprecedented election win and majority now, your Labor government has the rare opportunity of both time and control to continue to effect courageous change from a reform and policy standpoint. You've called out quite a long list of reforms already. So I guess my question is twofold. Perhaps expand a little bit on some of the key areas of priority and focus. And in balancing this great platform of opportunity as well, how will you seek to continue to promote some level of challenge to ensure there's sort of that robustness of accountability?
All right, well, thank you for that. It is true. We are down at 3.9% unemployment. I think New South Wales is about 5.4% and Victoria about 5.6%. Tasmania is, and South Australia, I think, are in the low fives, but you've got to remember all of them, their participation rates are much lower than ours. So not only do we have a lower unemployment rate, we have also more people proportionately involved in the workforce. So the challenges of skilled labour and getting people just to do jobs is there for everyone, and I'm sure lots of people in this room understand that challenge. The alternative of too many people unemployed is obviously, worse. And so, but we have to get more people back in to fill some of the roles. So, huge investment in TAFE, lots of effort in training West Australians, particularly those who might have dropped out of the workforce. And we will, when we reopen, seek to get more skilled labour back into the state in areas that we are particularly short. So that will be a large part of what we're going to do. In terms of the opportunities out there, I outlined a bunch in my speech. Our reconnection or connection package with the world is all about ensuring that we solve some of those problems and get some of those industries that have suffered grievously over this last couple of years, give them an opportunity to shine again. The pandemic basically meant a whole bunch of industries did extraordinarily well. Those that sold commodities to the world, that was hungry for commodities for stimulus did incredibly well. The housing industry, incredibly well. The package we put in place, amazingly successful. Retail, because people couldn't go overseas, spending money here, amazingly well. Tourism in many ways, particularly in the regions, because people couldn't go to Bali or Melbourne or wherever it might be, just amazingly well. Car sales, all these things, incredible stuff. But when you meet someone involved in international students, someone doing a niche business that only sort of appeals to an overseas tourist, someone involved in a travel agency, some of those sorts of things, very difficult for them over the course of the last couple of years. And that's why our package that I announced just before is all targeted at those industries so they get the opportunity to shine again. I was talking to, there's universities here, and I was talking to some of the English second language providers the other day. They've been through a terribly difficult period. And so attracting students, putting in place specific measures so we get students back into Western Australia, all that is part of industries whereby we can once again re-engage, but also we can provide the opportunity for us to compete against other states that will be seeking to do the same thing as well. In terms of the, you said about how do we ensure proper governance and proper accountability. The election in March was obviously a bit of a result to behold. But all of the accountability measures in the Parliament and also in government are all still there. You know, the Auditor General, the Ombudsman, or the committee system, the opposition controls one of the major committees of the Parliament. The Parliament still functions as normal. There's votes, there's accountability, there's the media. All those things are still there. Nothing has changed. The only thing that's really changed in the upper house is that we pass laws to make it democratic, that's all. So I would have thought that's an accountability measure. Democracy is actually what we're supposed to stand for. So that's one of the accountability measures we put in place.
Thank you, Premier. Now, we can't have a Q&A with, I guess, no talk about diversification and iron ore. You've covered some of it already, but it's quite a popular question, so I will give you an opportunity to expand. Given that, you know, what's made us successful and prosperous over the last 20 years isn't necessarily the same drivers for our future success, and you did talk about, you know, long-term planning and approach with your government. Perhaps, can you share with us, firstly, any insights on how our relationship with China is going compared to last year? This is obviously to combat the near-term, you know, reliance that China's trying to move away. And I guess secondly, on that diversification question, I suppose, you know, how do you plan to keep the West Aussies like us in the room here living in the prosperous lifestyles that we've become accustomed to?
Okay, the relationship with China, as I've said many times, is very important. We spent 50 years building a strong relationship with China, and obviously the last 3 years or so have been much more difficult. Has it improved? I don't think so. Nationally, hasn't improved. I think we need to put effort into making it more balanced, and certainly that's one of my plans when I can get the opportunity to travel and make sure we re-engage. I will do that to China and whatever level, make sure I put the case that Western Australia continues to be a reliable and very strong trading partner and a state that wants to continue to have a good relationship. I think that's very important. Some of the language nationally, I saw some recently, once again, all this stuff about, to put it mildly, going to war. I don't get it. I don't understand why people in politics talk like that. I think that is just unnecessary. And I've said that over the course of the last 2 years. One, it's unnecessary, and two, it's inaccurate. So there's no point to it. And it's actually quite counterproductive. So I just urge everyone engaging that sort of language to stop being irresponsible. In terms of the second part of your question, which was keep us prosperous,
Yep.
Well, that's keeping our trading relationship strong is an important part of that. Diversifying our economy, which is some of the stuff I talked about before, is an important part of that. We've done other things recently. We announced a major hydrogen strategy recently. We're actually changing the law around the pastoral estate to ensure that renewable hydrogen can be a major part of what actually happens on the land around Western Australia. We have unlimited sun and wind, and that's what renewable hydrogen requires. And so we put in place a package of reforms there just recently, and we'll pass them through the Parliament to allow for that. Big diversification opportunity there. And obviously I'm about to go to a jobs, what we call our Jobs Task Force meeting with a whole lot of industry shortly. But coming up with, you know, new industries, particularly in manufacturing and capitalising on our strengths in mining is important. Little known fact, but Rio Tinto the other day announced that they're going to build 50 rail carriages in Western Australia, and they're going to continue to build 10 per year. So if BHP and FMG and some of the others, Roy Hill, do something similar, a whole new industry will be created. So those are the sorts of things we're working on to make sure we diversify.
Thank you, Premier. You mentioned hydrogen, so maybe that's a good segue a little bit into climate change and ESG, environment, social and governance. It's increasingly dominating the agendas of world leaders, and the recent Glasgow COP26 conference saw, you know, greater commitment to transition away from fossil fuels faster, and financial institutions committed a staggering $130 trillion of capital towards decarbonisation initiatives. given we're best known for our resources industry, it was really positive to see your government release WA's first ever ESG investor investment pack a couple of weeks ago. Some people in the room may not be aware. Perhaps talk us a little bit through some of the themes from that and how you see WA transitioning to net zero by 2050.
So we did release the ESG prospectus, if you like, so that internationally they can see what we do in terms of those issues, particularly environment. I'll give you a couple of examples, again, you might not be aware of. I announced a couple of months ago that we were going to stop logging native forests, and once the current contracts expire, which is in 2 years from now, we're not going to cut down trees anymore. And so that's an important part of what Glasgow was talking about, doing things like that. So preserving our native forests, that will mean 400,000 additional hectares going to our national park estate. And we're, as part of that, going to spend $350 million on pine plantations so that the housing industry and construction actually has a reliable supply of timber, softwood, into the future. So that investment alone is $400 million to save our forests and to transition totally into plantation timber. As part of it, we're basically getting out of carry now, so we're not even going to cut down carry anymore. So those sorts of things are pretty remarkable things towards, one, conservation, but two, dealing with some of the issues that were flagged in Glasgow. The hydrogen strategy, as I just mentioned, we announced $130 million or so towards a joint package with the Commonwealth the other day, $135 million, which is about creating 2 hydrogen hubs, one in Karratha and one at Oakajee, just north of Geraldton. So the opportunities for renewable hydrogen are there. Other states do hydrogen, but they burn coal in which to create it, which is kind of counterproductive. Whereas we're moving totally towards a renewable hydrogen arrangement. Obviously, the demand for coal goes down continually in Western Australia, and we don't export coal. However, we do export gas. And the thing about gas is the emissions from gas are a third to a half those of coal. So if we ever want to get other countries off coal, those sorts of things help. It's not as though you can get off coal without something to get you through a transition period.
Thank you. And we've got a question here on whether the state government is thinking about providing incentives for electric vehicle adoption, similar to other states.
Well, we thought about it, but what we have done is put in place a electric vehicle charging network, or putting in place, all over the state. So wherever you drive, bar, in the middle of the desert, you can charge your vehicle. So that will extend all the way to Broome and I think Kununurra, and down the southwest and out to the goldfields. So the opportunity will be there. If you buy an electric vehicle, wherever you go, you will be able to get your vehicle charged. That's been one of the disincentives to electric vehicles, that people know they can drive around the city, they can plug it in at work or plug it at night. But let's imagine they want to go to the country, how do they get it charged? So we've got an electric vehicle charging network rolling out around WA.
Thank you, Premier. So I imagine you've been on quite the roller coaster ride. Crisis management, immense popularity, landslide election win, followed more recently by some death threats to yourself and your family. And I understand, I think seeing the news this morning, there was also a little incident, I think literally overnight as well, near your house. Did you want to just share maybe how these extreme highs and lows have impacted you personally, and maybe how these experiences shape some of your decision making?
The anti-vax sort of thing that's really come up quite prominently in the last couple of months has obviously been a bit of a surprise to me. I suspect it's been a bit of a surprise to a lot of the people in this room as well. All of us have taken medication in one form or another our entire lives, and modern medication is very important. I was talking to someone yesterday who as a kid had polio. It's actually the governor, had polio as a boy. Polio was terribly debilitating. Doesn't exist anymore because we created vaccines. When I went to sea the first time in the Navy, I had a bunch of injections before I went. And when I was at sea, we had to take medication for malaria every day. That was a condition of being in the Defence Force, and that's what you did. The current behaviour and the current anti-vax behaviour is a bit out of control, but obviously, anti-vaxxers driving cars at power poles outside my house and ramming them is a bit beyond the pale in my view, and some of the protest activity we're seeing is pretty extraordinary stuff and really not the Australian way. So I just ask them all to tone it down a bit, listen to the medical science and just go and get vaccinated. People choosing to give up their jobs because they read some conspiracy theory online, they'll regret, no doubt, in the future in their lives, and they'll wonder why they did it when everyone else happily goes along and is healthy and keeps their employment and is better protected from COVID. I read a story this morning, I think it was a British newspaper, about an anti-vaxxer who was very fit, got COVID and then died a horrible death, and he was highly agitated before he died about the fact he refused to take the vaccine, and terribly regretful for himself and his family. They're the sorts of stories people should be reading, not some of the other conspiracy theory stuff that originates from very venal people around the world. So, look, we'll continue, and the impact on me is it just makes me more determined to do the right thing. This sort of stuff doesn't deter me, it just makes me more determined to ensure that people get vaccinated, that we keep our state safe, that we come out of this one of the best places in the entire world.
Thank you, Premier, and perhaps just for, I'm being told, the very last question here. So it's been 2 years since the world learned of COVID-19, and every time we hit a period of somewhat where the outlooks look a bit more stable and settled, a new variant challenges the outlook. I guess for you, what is the biggest challenge that you're working on facing the state, and how can this room of leaders, professionals, academics help and support you?
Biggest challenge? Well, continue to talk up Western Australia, continue to invest here, continue to support the measures we're putting in place to get vaccinated, and continue to take advantage of the opportunities that are available here. It's not an exaggeration to say we're one of the most successful places in the entire world. Fortunately, during the state election campaign back in perhaps February, Standard & Poor's released a survey of all the jurisdictions in the world and who had the strongest financial management. It turned out Western Australia came first, and we were slightly in front of North Rhine-Westphalia in Germany in terms of subnational jurisdictions. So everything here should be optimistic, and we should talk ourselves up, and we should look for the opportunities that are here, and we should embrace the success of the state and continue to sort of take on the naysayers and the people who want to talk us down and attack us and say that everything's wrong and somehow we're all we've failed or whatever it might be, because by every single indicator the opposite is true. I've been through this over the course of the last 2 years. Every decision you make is second guessed. All of those sort of Eastern States commentators, some Eastern States politicians who have never been here, saying it's all terrible here and we're all locked down and we're living this shocking life, they wouldn't have a clue. And so, it gets you down a bit sometimes that you've got to keep pointing it out to them. But the more people that point it out, the more people that highlight the strengths of Western Australia and continue to promote us and make sure that we are on being seen as the success story we are, the better, and I think that'll bode well for our futures.
Well, thank you, Premier, for keeping our state performing strongly over the last 2 years, before then as well, but particularly over the COVID period. It's great to hear the initiatives you outline in terms of diversifying and how we're going to reconnect and strengthen as we come out of this in the recovery. And so, everyone, would you please join me in thanking the Premier?
Thank you. Thanks, Caroline. Thank you.
Just a second. And now, to provide the vote of thanks, I'd like to welcome Andrew Mccluskey, Executive General Manager of Siemens.
Well, thank you, Caroline, and thank you, Premier, for such an insightful overview of the recent successes and current plans that your government has in the workings for Western Australia in the months and years to come. It's a privilege to be able to do the vote of thanks to the Premier at this important forum and to continue a long-standing relationship that Siemens has had both with the WA Government and CEDA over many years. Premier, you talked about COVID, a topic that won't seem to go away easily and one that occupies an enormous amount of time and energy for all of us. Apart from the many serious adjustments and implications to our daily lives, who would have thought that it would have led to an AFL Grand Final to be finally hosted here in Perth, hopefully not the last. More seriously, being here physically at this event with our customers, colleagues and friends is something we all value particularly at this time, and we recognise the important role that the West Australian Government has played in keeping us safe. This is something most of us would have taken for granted in the past. Being here today is a great illustration of this challenge, because today I'm representing Siemens not only on behalf of our 200 West Australian employees, but also on behalf of over 2,000 employees across Australia, and also our CEO, Jeff Connolly, who is based in Melbourne. Jeff is no doubt looking forward to a time when he can be physically present at such an important event such as this in Western Australia and meet with you again in person, Premier. From the viewpoint of one of the world's largest technology companies, and one that by next year will have been operating in Australia for 150 years, we can see that technology will continue to be integral to Australia's and WA's future successes. Siemens and many other stakeholders here today will benefit from these important WA initiatives and investments mentioned today, such as the Reconnect WA, the Skilled Labour Program, budget surplus achievement, continued growth against the national trend, the new port plan and energy reform, just to name a few. I'm always proud when I think about the role that Siemens technology plays across Western Australia, from building automation and security in major buildings and stadia, to medical imaging technology in major hospitals across the state. As well, the role we play in stabilising the energy grid and exporting local WA rail innovations to the world through Siemens MRX technology out of Perth. With the ambitions and plans that you outlined today, Premier, I can see a critical role for our technology for at least another 150 years in Western Australia. Western Australia has always been a particularly innovative state, and COVID has really highlighted a great reliance on being more digital than ever before. We are seeing industries embrace digital technologies which allow them to use data to predictively maintain their operations, to remotely commission new plants and do plant upgrades, and even pivot to new business models to quickly adjust to rapidly changing environments and demands. The transition to a digital and high-tech future has never been as urgent as it is now, which is why we are lending our support to initiatives like university software donations across Australia, of which UWA is a major beneficiary. All of these things will lead to a truly more sustainable approach for Western Australia, combining environment, economic and social needs. I would like to thank and congratulate the Premier and his team for not only articulating a world-class vision of the future for WA, but for also so successfully navigating the difficult conditions that have presented themselves since the beginning of the pandemic. CEDA was established to harness the ideas and influence of leading thinkers from business, government, community and academia. Judging by the calibre of the audience in this room today, it's fair to say that we all value this independent forum, and we certainly value hearing from our leaders and decision makers, and especially take a strong interest in the future of our great state. Thank you, Premier. Thank you, CEDA. And I'll now hand over to Diane Smith-Gander to formally close the event. Thank you.
You're not getting this one. Thank you very much, Andrew, and thank you, Premier. It is really a very long tradition of the Premier of the Day to come to CEDA and present the State of the State. And today you even brought the treasurer with you, so thanks so much for doing that. Our major sponsors, Curtin University, PwC, Siemens and Westpac, and supporting sponsors INPEX and Rio Tinto. Without you, this doesn't happen. So I'm sure you are as delighted as I am with the announcement today of Reconnect WA. Super to hear your support for international students coming back, for tourists and skilled workers. We need so many more of those. It doesn't happen, of course, without all the great questions that our audience has put into the pigeonhole. So please rate this event so that we can make it even bigger and better next year. And you will receive a link to today's live stream recording. Now, you probably have not failed to notice that I've brought a friend up here with me. This is Hannah. Hannah is the HBF hobby horse. I was at HBF earlier today, and as many of you know, I am often on a hobby horse. Now, for those Key Start people somewhere in this room, they think I'm about to talk to you, Premier, about stamp duty and land tax, and you know that's one of my favourite hobby horses, but not today. Today I'm getting on the hobby horse of vaccination, and I am channeling my inner Carolyn Chan Asian tiger mum. You told us we have an 87.1% single-dose vaccination rate. Now, when you set out that 90% target, a lot of people said you were a lunatic. And I am very thankful that when the West asked me whether I thought that was the case, I said, I think it's going to be really hard, but if we don't set a 90% target, I can guarantee you we won't get there. Now, given that there are already some states in Australia that have managed to get to 90%, that was an inspired move. So congratulations on that 90% target, but we're only 87.1 single dose. So the tiger mum question is obviously, what have you done with the other 12.9%? But of course, it's actually not your problem. So I want everyone in this room to do something for me right now. Can you please look around the faces of everyone at your table? Okay, do that for me. Now, look around the rest of this room. In this room, we have the key opinion leaders. We have the key leaders of the vast majority of the workforce of our great state. It is our job to get that 12.9%. We need to get as close to 90, as high a vaccination rate as possible. Let's make sure we get that 90 and actually blow right through it. This is a leadership task. It is a leadership task for us. I think this room can go back today and get us to that place fast. I know you've all been doing the hard yards on it, but me and Hannah the hobby horse would like you to have another go. CEDA has a great leadership program, the Copeland program. The QR code is on your table. I'm going to be one of the speakers this year. I am going to do a case study as my contribution on what did the Copeland leadership people do to make sure we hit our 90% vaccination double dose rate and got the borders open. So I'll be looking forward to seeing as many of your organisations represented at Copeland this year. So thank you very much for coming here today. Have a great holiday season in whatever way you celebrate it, and see you next year.